I'm sure many of you are excited today about what you're about to learn, right?
Yeah. It's a great Monday.
It is. So, I guess the question is, you guys, how many of you are note takers? Kind of, sometimes.
Depends on the class.
Depends on the class. I agree. So I guess my first question would be, why don't you write down for about 30 seconds to a minute what you think of when you think of note taking? What's good note taking? What should you take in notes? Just some overall ideas about what notes involve. Maybe think about how you've done it in the past. Maybe what you know good note taking is, but haven't yet really done. Okay, now what I want you to do is share that with your shoulder partner, okay? So Riley and Justin, you guys talk for a second. Tell your partner what you wrote down. Amy, share with Kanye. Leah? Specific?
You? Details. I'm back with details.
Yeah, I just said like bullet points and then present versions of things, but like, I always abbreviate things, but if it makes sense to me, that's all that matters. Yeah. And then I organize it by like main things, you know?
Yeah, I say write down on the whiteboard / chalkboard / CD. Copying what the teacher says, either copying anything that sounds important. Paraphrasing notes, not just copying. Note sheeting in the note department.
Okay, so now share with the rest of the class. What did we have? What were some of the things that we thought of when we thought of good note taking?
Key ideas.
Key ideas. What else? I heard paraphrasing. Huh?
Main event.
Main events, absolutely. Amy?
Just look online to find the answers.
Look online to find the answers. I don't know if that's great note taking. What else? That's bad note taking?
It doesn't always don't do that.
Okay, fair enough.
Use lots of colors.
Colors, okay. Keep it lively.
Yeah.
What else?
I like, abbreviate things
Absolutely.
so that they make sense to me, like even if it's a weird acronym that doesn't exist.
Absolutely.
As long as it makes sense to me.
It also saves time, right?
Yeah.
If you go that route. There's lots of different ways to do it. There's no perfect way and everyone has their own system. For the most part, how many of you guys are actively, strategically taking notes now? No one?
In my math class I do.
In your math class you do? Okay.
Math class I do as well.
Okay.
And
So what I'd like is, and I know this year has pretty much come to an end, but what I'd like to do today is to teach you how to do strategic note taking. We'll go over, I'll show an example and how I do it, and then what we can do is, hopefully you guys can apply this to the last lesson that we're gonna do, which is 26.1, okay? So, first and foremost, I think that strategic note taking is something that everyone should know, everyone should learn, because if you're gonna go on to post-secondary school, it's definitely something that you're gonna need. But even in life, it's good. Let's say at a job that you need to listen to a boss, right, to get directions on how to do something. I mean, you might wanna write it down, right? Even on your phone, there's notes on your phone now, right, where you could take notes. Or if someone just taught you how to do something, you could write a list of the order of how to do it, right? So you don't have to go back next time and ask for help or how to do something again. So basically, note-taking can be applied to anything in life, not just college, but real-world application too. So, what I'd like to do next is kind of go over, I'll lecture for a few minutes, and then you guys just kind of take mental notes of what I'm saying and what you would write down, okay? And then what I'm gonna do is give you a list or a idea what good notes look like, okay? This is a lesson that we've already done before. It's over conservatism, so the beginning of this chapter, or 25. Basically at the end of this I want you to say, you know, I know how to take good notes, and then going forward I'm gonna at least apply this or try it, and maybe you find a different version, not quite the same version that I'm doing, but something that will work for you, regardless of what it is, whatever it is you do after high school, but you can also use this for your senior year next year. Amy?
You just not want us to actually write it down.
No, you don't have to. What I want you to do right now is, you can take notes though, don't get me wrong. If you want to compare and contrast what I have, you're more than welcome. That's not a bad idea, Amy. But what I'm going to do then is just kind of just lecture for a few minutes over 25.1, which if you remember correctly, was our opening section on conservatism, right? So basically conservatism started in if you remember, the new wave was in '64 with the election and Goldwater running, and he was kind of the far right figure, right? He was the one, if you remember correctly, with the nuclear bomb commercial. So this push had been coming for a while, but Reagan was kind of the one who ushered in the new movement of conservatism. I think the main idea would be that conservatism reached the high point in the election of 1980 with Ronald Reagan winning the presidency. And why it matters now is that in the early 21st century, conservative views strongly influenced both major parties. The New Right is what they were called, and the New Right was supported by the middle class, if you remember correctly. Smaller government, cutting taxes, ridding regulations, deregulating, if you remember that, and limiting, which basically they thought limited economic competition. There were four main goals of the conservative movement. The first was to shrink the size of the federal government and reduce spending. The second was to promote family values and patriotic ideals. The third was to stimulate business by reducing government regulations and lowering taxes. And then the fourth was to strengthen our national defense. The conservative movement, when it was building, talked about entitlement programs, and we know those as Medicare, Medicaid, welfare, some of these programs that provide relief to particular groups, and by about 1980, $300 billion was being spent annual on those. Of course, there's stories of fraud, and then that kind of builds resentment amongst the middle class. Why do these people get this and we don't get this? So this frustrated some people, in particular middle class taxpayers. And kind of the idea that maybe the liberals had gone too far, the left had gone too far, and they wanted to kind of dial that back. The New Right, which is this group that led this push, focused their energy on social issues such as abortion, which if you remember correctly was passed in 1973. Excuse me, Roe v. Wade was the court case that decided that. They also blocked the Equal Rights Amendment, the ERA, if you remember that, where they needed to get 38 states ratified, and they only got 35, if I remember correctly. And school prayer had been outlawed since 1962 because of a Supreme Court decision. So these are all major cases that had kind of really energized this base, this New Right base. Another big one was affirmative action, if you remember correctly. This required employers and educational institutions to give special consideration to women, African Americans, and other minority groups, even if they weren't necessarily the best qualified. And then if you remember from our last chapter, it talked about the Bakke case, which talked about reverse discrimination. This was a gentleman who was trying to get into medical school and was denied because he was white, because they had a quota for 16 minority students. All right, so there's just an example of me lecturing for a few minutes, right? So here's what an example of what that would look like, okay? So first, we put the topic, right? Now, if this was before our lecture had started, you might have a template, okay? That looks something like this, the strategic note-taking form. Here's what I have for you guys. So it says, what's today's topic? What was the topic? Conservatism, right? And then you would write, what do you know about? What do you know about it? Okay? You've done KWL charts, right? What do you know, what do you want to learn, right? So for this, you'd write what you already know, okay? And how does that play into what you're going to learn? It's important to recognize that because you can build upon your prior knowledge, right? So any examples there of that you can see when you compare and contrast kind of the note-taking form, you can see that name 3 to 7 main points. Well, the main points there were the new idea, or the new right, excuse me, right? The 4 main goals that I listed of the conservatives, which would be the 4 that I just listed. And then your vocab, which is what I was starting to go over, right? Now, who sees, what's a benefit of doing all this ahead of time?
Then when like it comes to the test, you don't have to go reread every single thing you need.
Exactly, Kalia, absolutely. Amy, can you think of anything else, or are you gonna say that too?
Here's my study guide partially.
Exactly. Would it really be easy to just copy and paste it? Let's say if you're writing this, or excuse me, if you're typing it, if you just copy and pasted all your vocab, you basically have your study guide already done, right? That'd be all your vocab. All your main points would already be here, right? And you wouldn't be like, oh, I gotta go reread 4 sections tonight, which is roughly probably 30 or 40 pages, right? So you're saving yourself a ton of time there by being proactive and doing notes ahead of time. And not only that, I'd be willing to bet you'll do a lot better on the test too, okay? Now I know some people struggle with test taking. I think this will make test taking a lot easier. So as you can see on the strategic note-taking form, you're gonna want write your main ideas like someone mentioned before. That's definitely something you wanna take in your notes, right? You're definitely gonna wanna have your goals. You know, what is, or I should say the topic. What's the topic? What do you know about the topic? Your summary. Describe how all the ideas are related, maybe after the fact. Here's the other thing. When we're in class, do I typically give you hints what's going to be on the test?
Yes.
A lot, right? If you're writing those down, that's another thing. Studying should not be that hard because I've already probably outlined or listed what's going to be on the test, okay? So next, let's do a little practice, okay? Why don't I lecture for a few minutes on the next section, which would be 25.2, okay? So let's just look at our book. Can you look at your book, Riley? Can you share with Justin, please? So just looking at this ahead of time, what are we going to write on here? Amy.
For the main idea, President Reagan and Bush pursued a conservative agenda that included tax cuts, budget cuts, and increased defense spending.
Right, so maybe we could just narrow that down and just put conservative agenda for the 80s, right? Because we know we're talking about President Reagan, who served 2 terms from 80 to 88. So we could write President Reagan's conservative agenda. Then, if we had time, we'll cut this down on time. We'll say you would have maybe what you already know about this, right? Which you might know a little bit because we just talked about in the last section what some of that involved, right? Cutting taxes, increased defense spending, things of that nature, right? Also, ahead of the fact, you could probably write down all these terms and names that the section has, right? And then as we get to them, fill them in, or as I talk about them. Here's the other thing that I make pretty easy, you guys. I usually, not always, but typically do I have slides that go along with lectures? Yeah. Can you copy and paste from those? Absolutely. It's not difficult. So that would be a huge time saver too. So I'll just talk for a minute here and we'll talk about section 2. So basically, Presidents Reagan and Vice President Bush pursued a conservative tax agenda that included tax cuts, budget cuts, and increased defense spending. The conservative views of Reagan and Bush created policies and priorities that affect government spending and budgeting today. So basically, they had an effect after that, right, on Clinton's presidency all the way to today. Reaganomics. What are Reaganomics? They are budget cuts, tax cuts, and increased defense spending, right? These are something that Reaganomics is basically his economic policy. And those are the three things that lead that. Now, does it work? To a certain degree, the economy turns around. The problem is our national deficit doubles during Reagan's terms. When we talk about budget cuts, we're talking about some of those entitlement programs that we talked about in section 1, right? That would be 10% budget cuts to Medicaid, school lunches, student loans, job training, welfare benefits, mass transit. Now, if someone was writing, or if I'm saying that in class, what could you write instead of writing all what I just said? What could you just put? What's a way to narrow that down?
Just everything
That I just listed. What did I just say they were called?
Reaganomics.
Well, entitlement programs,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So you could just put 10% cut to entitlement programs, right?
Instead of listing
Instead
out.
of listing all those, right? So that's a way to cut down on that. So does everyone have an idea of how that works? Or how we're talking about strategic note-taking for the most part? Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so what I'd like you to do is, on section 26.1, our next section, is to apply this, okay? And if you have any questions, stick around after class, let me know, and we can talk about it. Does everyone feel like you can say, like, I know how to take good notes now? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yes? No? Can I get a thumbs up, thumbs down? In the middle? In the middle? Okay, that's fine. You can stick around, Riley, and discuss it, okay? All right, well, I feel like everyone hopefully got something from this short lesson on strategic note-taking, and thank you all for coming.